In the 30s, three sociologists named Park, Burgess, and Shaw did a study of crime rates in various Chicago neighborhoods. The results were interesting, and considering this was almost 100 years ago, it is interesting that they have been ignored so long. What the study showed is that in certain areas, no matter who lived in that area, whether they were white or black, Irish, Jewish, Italian, Polish, Serbian, etc., it didn't matter the ethnicity or the color or the race or the religious preferences. Sexual preferences didn't count back then. The crime rate was constant. And from that they derived what they called the concentric ring theory, showing that crime rates varied from various zones, from inner city outward, until they got to, say, Winnetka or somewhere like that, where rich people lived. So for years, there's been a correlation between income and crime. And it's hard to deny this. But what do we have? We have a system where we don't look at societal causation. We like to blame it on individuals. So, for instance, when I go to court sometimes, and I have certain clients whose background would make it very easily predictable that they would become or could become criminals because the background was criminogenic, I would have some dumbass judge tell me, "Mr. Blewett, your client has to start taking responsibility for his actions." Now, I would respond, generally not orally, because I didn't think the judges would understand or give a damn anyway, that my clients would accept responsibility for their actions when society would start taking responsibility for causing their actions. Society's been unwilling to do this. So we have what the CDC calls an epidemic of shootings in schools. We have an epidemic with guns. We have an epidemic with shootings, killings, etc. Death by gunshot of teenagers now supersedes death by car accidents. So maybe we should deconstruct this a little bit. We have a society that is taught government is bad. We have a society that is taught taxes are bad. We have a society that is taught that the best way to succeed and the best way to have a successful society is to have a free market society and let the free market correct everything. Well, the free market isn't correcting shootings in school. The fact that schools would have been all private wouldn't have corrected that. Getting tough on crime won't correct it. We have legislation in this country based on public relations and not on evidence like most countries do. So what are the factors involving some of this? Well, first off, we have to look at our structure regarding mercantilism. We have gun manufacturers, And we supply a lot of arms for various wars, things like this. Our armament industry is very large, and it's unregulated to a large extent. And so is the advertising. The other factor is that ever since the Nixon administration, we have been selling surplus weaponry to the police. So the police are consumers of military weaponry. Now, to sell military weaponry, you have to have marketing techniques and marketing procedures and advertising and things such as this. So let's take, for instance, deodorant. How do they market deodorant? Well, they say that body odor offends people. And you can remember the commercial, don't you use Dial, don't you wish everybody did? Well, I met the person that came up with that slogan, and he very freely bragged about the fact that he created this problem to be solved by Dial soap, and it was all a marketing ploy. Let's look at guns now. We have a bunch of people saying we have guns, we have a gun problem, we have to do something about it. So Congress passes a law saying all excess military weaponry should be sold to police in order to prevent crime. Well, in my 50 years as a criminal defense lawyer, I've never had or known of anyone of my colleagues to have had a client with a submachine gun or AR or whatever. Most of them have had handguns. Policemen my age used to brag about how they had never drawn their weapons. My younger brother, who is active in NATO anti-terrorist activities, was a member of something they called Blue Light, and later, or earlier, a group called Green Hornets. Were very special operations warriors. He used to go around after he retired telling American Legion posts, police office, and anybody else that listened, that it would be dumb as hell to hire people like him as police officers because of their training. They're trained to kill and not to make arrests. Well, this is the training of the police now, because the police are wannabe warriors. They are told that there's a war on crime, and as a war on crime, they needed the weapons of war in order to give everybody equality and equal footing. Well, people with automatic weapons are like FARC in Colombia and various other revolutionary groups. Rarely do they have them in the United States, but we have our cops provided with the latest and greatest weapons. We have command centers and all this kind of stuff. And we make war on the citizenry. Now, any dumbass can see that that isn't the problem. The problem is we market fear in this country. We market fear in order to sell weaponry and other protections. The government is running a protection racket, and every once in a while they need violence in order for the racket to succeed. Now, cynically, you can say that's why they waited an hour and a half outside of the latest shooting in Texas, so they could get the casualties up, so they could sell more weaponry and mount more protection. I don't think that Texas militia acts like organized crime, but it's been a long time since I've tried any cases in Texas, at least 25 years, so I'm not current on the subject, but I rather doubt it. So we have everybody concerned about weapons, and we have this simplistic marketing technique is let's sell security systems, let's sell training, let's scare the shit out of school districts, and tell them that the Russians are coming, equivalent to that the shooters are coming, and let's build fortresses in which to educate our children. This could be done differently and probably less dramatically, and less traumatically, with less danger and bad consequences to our society, by checking out the causes and causation of crime and doing something in the area of prevention. Now, until the Nixon administration, there used to be money poured into theoretical criminology about research or funding research for crime causation. Instead of criminologists, now we have what they call police science majors. We have police science taught in colleges and universities. And instead of theoretical reasons for crime, the police science people determine how do you lock up more people more efficiently, and put on a public relations campaign that you're protecting the public. "70 years ago, or not quite that long ago, but several decades ago, when I was an undergraduate looking forward to a career in corrections, they had a master's program in corrections where they taught you how to teach people to use alarm clocks to wake up for work, how to budget, how to make applications, how to speak English correctly, how to fill out resumes, and how to have survival skills to live in society without blowing somebody's brains out. There was psychological counseling, there was training in this. It was a master's degree. Well, you pay people with master's degree, particularly back in the 60s, you had to pay for them. It was much easier to lock people up and a lot easier to budget that, and it was easier to market fear to the public than it was to educate them, because the politicians really believed that the great unwashed, the peasantry, were really stupid and that they were pigeons to be plucked. The corporations felt the same way. We don't want an educated consumer base. They might get wise to our tactics. So let's keep them ignorant and sell them and promise them anything but give them our page, essentially. And all the other advertising slogans. So until we start looking at why we have societies, why societies are organized, what societies are supposed to do, and what happens when societies form governments, we're going to have tragedies like this. Governments exist for the benefit of people, not for the benefits of merchants, corporations, or things like this. What would benefit society? Benefiting society would not be having a bunch of poor people, a bunch of homeless people, a bunch of drug addicts out there. That could hurt us or hurt our society. We don't need to kill off all those people. We don't need to run around in fear that just because they're poor, they might decide to do this, that, or the other, although that seems to be the marketing idea of commercialism, rather than look at poverty and do something about poverty and racial problems, things like this. We build gated communities so the privileged few can hide behind walls, gates, etc., private guards, things such as this, and not worry about the peasantry. We don't worry about the poor people. We don't worry about education, except for higher education. Not everybody in the world is going to go to college or university. Many are going to become tradesmen. We used to have good tradesmen training through union trainings, through union apprenticeship programs. I went through one myself. I was an apprentice barber for a couple of years. after barber school. And we learned that way. Now, I was a little bit different because I used my barber training to put me through approximately 9 or 10 years of higher education. But I had an indulgent wife at that time, and still do actually. And I used that training to give myself a lifestyle that I could afford to experiment. I could afford to take various courses at the university level. I could go to the university at graduate school level. I went to law school. I even contemplated going to medical school at one time. But I could do that because I had a trade that made pretty good money. And in fact, when I was in undergraduate school, I was cutting hair part-time, and my wife was teaching third grade full-time, and I made more money cutting hair than she did teaching. What do you make of that? But you don't have apprenticeship programs anymore. You have programs with trade schools that charge unconscionable amount of money for job preparation, which doesn't really work. You got people spending all this money for electronic school and various other trade schools, and they're privatized and not institutionalized. And guess what? People pay all this money and get in debt with student loans, and they have no way of repaying them because those jobs aren't there, or the school isn't recognized, or is ineffective at placing their students. One thing about union apprenticeship programs is there was placement for jobs. And I remember when I was in law school in the 60s, union jobs as electricians or high steel workers or whatever paid pretty damn good. Even back then, I still made more as a barber than my wife did teaching school after several years of experience and having had a master's degree. So there's something sort of wrong with that program. But right now, we are taught government's bad, unions are bad, private education is the best. We need to privatize our school systems because they're more efficient. Government's inefficient. Corporations can run things better. Well, that's true. I served on many boards of nonprofits, and it was a frustrating experience, frankly. I helped start up the Head Start program under Lyndon Johnson in Boulder, and at that time I concluded every nonprofit needed a fascist dictator in order to operate, because they weren't trained in participatory democracy. And it takes a while to train these people. And it isn't efficient. But consider this. Some governmental operations are efficient. Like medical care can be efficient. Why should some insurance company take a skim when they're run as profitably as possible? Well, where they're run as efficiently as possible? Where then is the profit going to come from? You're going to squeeze various things and cut here and cut there, and patients are going to suffer. Well, you look at the criminal system, it's the same thing. I've been retired a few years, and I've had this woman who's got really, really bad mental health problems, and she keeps trying to call. Well, it used to be somebody could call collect, and I could accept the charges. But we're making the jail system efficient, so you have to go through this private corporation and get an account and put money in the account to accept the payments. And if there's, after you're no longer working with that prisoner, any money left, they get to rip off. And Why should an indigent prisoner, or a prisoner who's arrested with and has no access to checkbook, credit cards, etc., or any cash, have to rely on somebody to pay a third party so that they can make a phone call? And think about prisoners that are on work release, for instance. Can you imagine being an employer and you get a call? You have a collect call from a penal institution or correctional institution. If you want to accept this call, then call this corporation here and give them some money so you can open up an account, and they secure the calls against that account. Of course, they're going to take a profit off of that and take some money off of that. And they justify by saying it's cheaper for the jail because they don't have to keep books. And the domestic population goes for that. And for some reason, the DAs and the judges have bought into it. Well, most judges are former DAs anyway. But why would anybody that believes in freedom, believes in the Constitution, believes in the benefit of government to govern the people, for the people, by the people, want to donate money to a third independent corporation so they can skim a profit? That's bullshit. That's like in the Civil War days, the corporations hiring out prison wardens to send them laborers so they could get cheap labor. You know, prisoners aren't there for people to exploit. And neither are poor people, or they shouldn't be. So we should start looking at causation rather than say, let's limit guns, let's make this illegal, or let's make that illegal, or let's make something else illegal. Another example, for instance, I had a relative die in a plane crash. National Transportation Safety Board investigated the plane crash and found that the throttle wire wasn't torqued. Well, that was a long investigation, but I think of car accidents that I've handled cases for. And a few cases, roads have been poorly engineered. There were other factors instead of careless driving. If we'd investigate accidents the same way we did airplane accidents, I think we'd have different results. But what would happen then? Well, you'd be forced to make the roads better, paint the striping better, mark the lines better, mark the passing zones better, eliminate certain T-bone intersections, eliminate some sharp curves, and maybe angle a few roadways for the curves and take other factors into consideration. Now that would probably limit a lot more road deaths than charging people with drunk driving, driving under the influence of weed, careless driving, etc. So let's start rectifying things instead of think about how we can use revenue generation to punish poor people so they don't do things. And they do punish poor people. Many of my colleagues don't give a shit about careless driving tickets because they can pay them. Teenagers do because they can't pay them. Their parents have to a lot of times. Well, that's enough of my rambling for today. I would love to have some comments on this. I would like to start a series on these. I was just giving some random thoughts right now to see what kind of response I'd get. You guys have a good day and have a good weekend. And please subscribe to my channel. Please give me comments. That's where I get ideas from. And please start being more aware.